amount of weird Catholic shit on earth is unfathomable to the average human mind, right? So I don't know how extensively I've talked about this. I will talk about it in the future, but I did do a master's fellowship at the Vatican Archives, which sounds fucking insane, and that's because it was, and it was the coolest thing that ever happened to me. But I got to go and be like study and be taught under like the head archivists at the Roman State Archives, at the Vatican Archives, and they took us through, and everything they told me I can relay because I went on scholarly whatever. So they used to be called the Vatican Secret Archives up until like 2008. Like they tried to rebrand it because Pope John Paul II in the 90s, like 1998 maybe, he opened it up to like scholars who wanted to come, because it's not like when you think of the Vatican Archives, you might just think church records, but like think about every piece of reach the Catholic Church had going from 1400 on. Think about that. There are red silk manuscript from China written in like golden ink on red silk from missionaries in China that were there and wrote back to the Vatican, because when these missionaries were out doing whatever, they had to report back to the Vatican. That is why that is like the biggest archive. Like there are over 1 million miles of documents in there, right? And I'm sure that I'm even shortchanging that. It is it's so many that they had to move it into 2 separate buildings, right? The State Archives of Rome is going to hold like more of the I don't want to say political, but like kind of the state of Rome, right? Because the Vatican had reach in every, not just part of Italy, but every part of the world, the Americas, China, everywhere. So anywhere they went, that would go to the Vatican Archives, which are, in St. Peter's Basilica that we were talking about. The State Archives of Rome are actually in a building that was built originally as a church that was Borromini as well. So it was a big, beautiful church with this gorgeous amphitheater. Like I'll show you and shit. But so that is where most of like the Roman archives are, right? And this is not going back to ancient Rome. This is in terms of like modern Rome, like about like the 1000 AD kind of on, right? So when we're dealing with that, you also have to think about how many invasions that have happened. Like particularly a really notable one. So Napoleon actually occupied the Vatican and the seat of Rome for like 2 years, something like that, a handful of years, a decent period of time. He was trying to create his own universal archives, right? And there is no, like, you would think the singular tense of archives would be archive. Archive is the verb to archive. And archives is what it's called. I don't know. That's just what it is if you were wondering. But Napoleon wanted to create a universal archives of everywhere that he conquered, everywhere that he, his empire had its own, like he wanted it to have like record, like he wanted to recreate the Library of Alexandria, right? As most of us do. Get in fucking line, pal. But anyway, all that happened. So over the span of those couple of years, a shitload, a metric fuck ton, right? I don't, my Italian's not great, so I don't know exactly what number they said, but it was, about a shit fuck ton of the really important records were sent over to Avignon, where the papacy used to reside. And that, interestingly enough, another weird, freaky ancestry thing. Again, this all leads back together in my hyperfixated mind. My ancestor and my best friend's ancestor, we grew up 7 minutes away from each other in the same hometown, lived, whatever. Our ancestors were both cardinals under the same pope in the Avignon papacy in like 1280 something. Insane find. But anyway, I can go off on a million tangents, but all that to say, he brought like Galileo's heresy trial, like the big, and like when we're talking about these records, dude, it's not a fucking book. Like you've seen like what, like in Lord of the Rings when Bilbo opens up and Gandalf opens up all the big ass dusty scrolls and books. That's the shit we're dealing with, right? Books were like a folio, right? So like a foot long and like wide, and like monks would sew them to get like this, it's that time. So now we jump to Napoleon in the early 1800s, taking all these records that are like from the 14, 15, 1600s and before. We do not have an accurate idea of what was taken or what was lost, because it is simply so much. But we know that Galileo's heresy trial was returned, all the like big stuff, and that went on for years. There was like a lot of, you know, political unrest that came with that as well. I don't know as much about that, but I do know the archival side of it. But in the State Archives of Rome, where I was talking about, where it was a church built by Borromini, under Pope Alexander, I'm not sure which Pope Alexander, there've obviously been a bunch, but they created the Biblio Alexandrina, which is the little library Alexandria, and that is in the church that Borromini built that became the State Archives of Rome, which is also really fucking sick. God, this library is I'm just going to show you guys like a handful of pictures that I took. Thanks for sticking around if you have. So this is some of the pictures that I took when I was there. This is the Biblio Alexandrina. And there was a exhibit going on when I was there. It was all about authors who are like Holocaust survivors, Holocaust remembrance, children's literature. So that was a really interesting exhibit. But, you know, this sculpture was done by Borromini as well. Up here, that was the Pope himself, and it's got these like it's unbelievable. And this is the little library. You know what I'm saying? Like, the scale of grandeur, you have to understand, they had there was no limitations on what they could and couldn't do, have, make. It's fucking, there's so many levels to this shit, but like, I just want to appreciate the architecture. So like, this is the size of the books that, you know, they're hauling back and forth, and this is really insane. Really is a treat. This is where the Vatican Archives are. This is in the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. I'll show like a zoomed out picture in a second, but I'm not joking. I started like crying, like the art and architecture that I've studied all my life. The knowledge that this is the place that holds the only records of my ancestors, because all my Cajun ancestors, the only records of them were Roman Catholic Church records. This is where they're all kept. Like, it's so overwhelming. And just to even like be in the presence of buildings of this magnitude with things that date back so far. Where I just was in that building was, how the hell do I get myself up there? The dome right here. I was in there, and then beneath the ground, that's where the crypts are. That's where the Vatican Archives are. These are the State Archives of Rome. And look at this. There's a gorgeous bell tower on top. And I took notes about why and how this was made. But this is just stuff I'm remembering off the top of my head. And like I said, the Biblia Alexandrina, very like, God, you can see like how big the stacks of books are. And then I took this picture. How insane is this? So when you walk into St. Peter's Basilica, and when I say the Vatican Archives, I'm talking about St. Peter's Basilica and its archives on the top and bottom. That dome, right? That is not the main dome. That is not the big one we saw from outside. There's so many secondary ones. I took like a panorama or whatever. So the floor, and then Michelangelo's Pietà, which I was breathing distance from. And I also took this photo. It was unbelievable. There was nobody else in there that day but me. It was, I mean, like, again, I'm not, I don't go to Catholic church anymore, right? I have my own spiritual, things, but it was a very spiritual experience to be around, just art of this, like, magnitude, like I haven't studied every fucking inch of this, not even just in school, but just because I love it and I'm fascinated with it, and now I get to, what the hell? And our tour guide said, follow me up this hill. This is a hill that just overlooks Vatican City that you can't get it. I said, where are we? He's like, well, it's for employees only. And we had to do like a big security screening. I had diplomatic immunity when I was there, which was like pretty cool. It feels like a hallucination, but it's real, and I cannot wait to write about it. And what the hell?